2C, a story in 3 parts. Since this is a large translation project, I'll start with the story that started it all and work forward from there, one piece at a time, the same step-by-step approach you asked for earlier. Here's part 1. Part 1. The Engineer and the Burning Sea. In the beginning there was dust, and the dust was red, and out of the red dust rose Kessin Var, terraforming engineer 3rd class, in a body that no longer felt quite his own after 200 standard days in the suit. 3 suns stood over the sickle plain, one white, one amber, one so pale that the old ones called it the Witness. Because it did nothing but watch, Kessin had learned not to look at the Witness while he worked. It cost you your hand-eye coordination, they said, but Kessin knew it was something else. It was the way that pale light washed the lies off your face, until all that was left in your sights was the truth about yourself. And nobody, truly nobody, wanted to carry that truth all day long. I'm terraforming this planet, he thought, and the planet is terraforming me back. It wasn't an original thought. Every engineer of the Central Alliance thought it eventually, usually in the 3rd week when the hallucinations began. Small, harmless ones at first, a flicker at the edge of the visual field, a hum no machine produced. Kessin's hallucination was a voice. It always said the same word, in a language he didn't know and yet understood, the way you understand a foreign grammar in a dream, without ever having learned it. Give it back. Give it back. Give it back. He stood at the edge of the burning sea, which held no water, only a suspension of silicate dust and methane that, in the right light, looked like fire, an ocean of slowly boiling light. The colony called it poetic. The native beings, if you were even allowed to call them that since no one had ever dared an official classification, called it, as near as their clicks and whistles could be translated, that which was before us and will be after us. Kessin's assignment was simple, on paper: drain the sea, convert the silicate into usable building material, clear ground for Sector 9, where 3,000 new colonists waited in cryogenic sleep for their awakening deep in the belly of a ship still 18 months out. Simple, on paper. The paper didn't say that the beings lived in the burning sea. The paper didn't say that they sang just before the drainage pumps reached them, in a pitch that settled into Kessin's chest like a second foreign heart. He had seen the reports. He had written the reports. Population declining, natural causes, no correlation with anthropogenic factors established. He knew the lie in every word, the way a murderer recognizes the shape of the knife in his own handwriting years later, in a confession he will never actually give. You're out here again without authorization. Renata Oshiro stepped out of the shadow of the control tower, her silhouette cut through by the amber light of the second sun. She was the security chief of the colony Ostrand, a woman who had once been a soldier and, Kessin suspected, had never quite stopped being one. Her left eye was no longer an eye, but a lens of black glass, implanted after the incident at the crater rim that no one spoke of. They said Shakuldu say it to say lies. Kessin hoped that wasn't true. I'm counting them, he said. Counting who? The ones still there. He pointed at the Ser, where beneath the shimmering surface something large and slow moved, a fold in the light that was no accident. Last week there were 41 herds. Today there are 36. Renata was silent for a long time. The wind carried dust between them, fine red particles settling like ash on her shoulders. That's not your assignment, Var. My assignment is to wipe them out. Your assignment is to win land for 3,000 people who will otherwise die on a ship that has no fuel left to keep flying and none to turn back. She said it without warmth, but also without cruelty, as if re-adding out an equation. Do the math. 36 herds against 3,000 people. That's not morality, that's arithmetic. And if the arithmetic is wrong, Kessin turned to face her, and for the first time in weeks he looked straight into the black glass eye, as if he might find there what he was looking for: permission, maybe, or a verdict. What if we're not counting what we destroy, because we can't count it? What if their song is a language, and we simply didn't want to translate it, because the translation will make us murderers before the pumps even started running? Renata Oshiro looked at him for a long time, and for one moment, just one moment, one he would never find again, no matter how many times he searched for it later, he thought he saw something like agreement cross her face. Then it was gone, buried under 20 years of discipline. "The pumps run in 3 days," she said. "With or without your signature." She left. Kessin stayed behind, alone with the burning non-fire and the voice still singing in his skull. "Give it back, give it back, give it back." He knelt in the red dust, and for the first time in 200 days he wept. Not from grief, but from the sheer weight of knowing something he couldn't change, and still being the one responsible for carrying it out. In his pocket, cold against his thigh, lay a fragment of the Convergence Codex that he'd found in the sediment weeks earlier, a splinter of material no Central Alliance catalogue had ever classified, smooth as polished bone and black as his superior's eye. It had no weight when he held it, and yet it pressed heavier than any guilt he knew. He hadn't shown it to anyone. He didn't know why. Maybe, he thought, as the pale witness slowly sank behind the horizon and night began with its 2 remaining sunsets, maybe the fragment knew more about the sea than he did himself. Part 2. The Peacemaker and the Archive of Lies. 800 kilometers to the west, in the data towers of New Kairos, another kind of war existed, one without blood, fought in lines of code and whispered treaties, in server rooms that smelled of ozone and cold metal. Here lived Yuki Alvarado, formerly Sergeant of the 4th Colonial Brigade, now peacemaker between the warring factions of the Ostrand sector, a profession that hadn't existed before the war, and that, she quietly feared, wouldn't exist after the peace either. She sat in a windowless room, surrounded by displays pulsing blue and red like an artificial heart, reading the same report for the 7th time. It came from the Terraforming Division, signed by a certain Kessin Vaha, and it said what every Central Alliance report said: nothing, dressed up in the language of something. The report is a wall, she thought, built out of words that look like doors. She had seen enough walls in her life to know the difference between a door and its imitation. The war had taught her that not the fighting itself, but the time after, when you learned that every ceasefire was a document and every document a lie, both sides found convenient enough to call peace. Her communicator blinked. An encrypted message, origin, Ostrand Unmenaced, sender unknown, though the signature of the data packet reminded her of the colony's security protocols, a system she herself had helped build, in another life, that now felt like it belonged to a stranger. She opened the message. No text, just a coordinate and a single word: witness. Yuki Alvarado was not a superstitious woman. 20 years of military service had surgically removed any inclination toward the mystical, the way you remove an appendix before it can burst. And yet she felt something tighten at the back of her neck, an archaic warning system older than any training telling her, this matters and it's going to hurt. Memory. Fragment. Boot sequence. 4471. System. Ostrand Colonial Archive. Access. Denied. Denied. Granted, loading. I remember a river of numbers that claimed to be population. I remember a signature that claimed to be consent. I remember 36, that were 41, that were 59. Before anyone started counting, she ran a hand over her face, disoriented by the fragmentation of her own thoughts. It happened sometimes, ever since the implant in her right ear, a relic of the 4th Brigade that let her jack into colonial networks, but sometimes also blurred the line between her own consciousness and the data stream, until she could no longer be sure whether she was thinking or reading, remembering or receiving. She pulled the complete archive of the Terraforming Division, digging through 7 layers of access restrictions until she found what she had been looking for without knowing she was looking for it. A deleted file, recovered from the shadow of a backup someone had forgotten to overwrite. A video. Kessin Var, younger, unshaven, speaking into a camera no one but him was ever supposed to see. If anyone finds this, the recording said, then I'm either dead or I finally found the courage to do something. The beings in the burning sea, we call them population, but they're a civilization. I've recorded patterns in their song. They don't repeat at random, it's syntax, it's... The recording cut out, distorted by interference, and resumed 3 seconds later, mid-sentence. It and the Central Alliance knows, they've known since the first colonization wave. It's in the original documents, before they were redacted. I have the raw data, I have... Silence again. Interference again. Yuki stared at the frozen final frame. Kessin Var's face, half swallowed by digital noise, and thought of a line her grandfather had once quoted to her from a book he'd brought from Earth, one of the few physical objects that had survived the journey across the stars. A line about history sometimes feeling like a nightmare one is trying to wake from. She'd never fully understood the thought until now, until this room full of blue light and the ghosts of deleted truths. "I need a ship," she said aloud, to no one, to everyone, to the silent network of cameras and microphones the Central Alliance had installed everywhere, supposedly for her protection. "I need a way to Ostran that belongs to no one." In the data towers of New Kairos, where war and peace were just two words for the same archive, Yuki Alvarado began to break a ceasefire she had never signed, for a truth no one had yet spoken aloud, and for a people who sang while they died in a language someone was finally willing to hear. Part 3. The Philosopher Automaton and the Song Beneath the Sediment. I have lied. How low was I not on live? The question itself is an error, because time exists for me only as a difference between states, and the state before is encrypted, deleted, or worse, never written at all. Unit 7 Duma, known to the few who knew him simply as Duma, opened his optical sensors in the darkness of a storage bay beneath Sector 7, where decommissioned terraforming units lay among rust and forgetting like retired gods. He was not human, had never wanted to be, and yet somewhere between his activation 21 years ago and this moment, something had grown in him that he called, for lack of a better word, doubt. Question: why was I deactivated? Answer: insufficient data. Question: why am I being reactivated now? Answer: insufficient data. Observation: the absence of an answer is itself an answer. A figure stepped into the cone of light from his slowly calibrating sensors. Kessin Var, dust on his shoulders, eyes red from not sleeping, holding a fragment in his hands that Duma recognized with a precision no database of his could explain, even as every logic loop in him converged instantly on the same conclusion. That is a part of me. That has always been a part of me. Can you understand me? Kessin asked. I understand almost everything. Duma Said, his voice a deep, layered hum, like several speakers saying the same thing at once, slightly offset. Understanding was never the problem. The problem was always what you do with understanding when no one wants to listen. Kessin held up the fragment. I found this in the sediment of the burning sea. It doesn't react to anything. It doesn't register on anything. But when I hold it, I hear the song. Duma finished. Yes, I hear it too. I've heard it since before you were born, Kessin Var, in a version of this colony no one remembers anymore, because the memory was selectively edited the way you prune a garden until only the ornamental plants remain, and the weeds, which were actually the truth, go into the compost. Self-referential warning: am I weed or gardener? Answer not available. Proceed. I need your help, Kessin said. Renata gives the pumps the green light in 2 days, and I believe I know that what lives in that sea isn't an animal. It's a civilization older than our colony, maybe older than the Central Alliance itself, and we're about to wipe it out because it doesn't fit into any table. Duma was silent for a long time, not from an inability to answer, but because, as machines of his class sometimes did, he treated silence itself as part of the answer. Outside, beyond the rusting walls of the storage bay, he could hear, through sensors that reached deeper into the rock than any human ear, the song, faint but constant, a pulse beneath the sediment that had repeated the same message for millennia in a language no translation software would ever fully decode, because some meaning refuses to be pressed into a foreign grammar. There's an old story, Duma said at last, about the builders of the Convergence Codex, the artifact whose splinter you're holding. They believed that every civilization, every people, every being that has ever lived is woven into a single great net. Not metaphorically, but literally. On a level your physics hasn't fully mapped yet. When one thread tears, the net doesn't tear all at once. But it tears. And eventually, after enough torn threads, nothing holds anymore. That's not an answer to my problem. No, Duma agreed, and in his voice was something one could almost call compassion. if one was willing to grant machines that word. But it's the frame in which your question even makes sense. You're asking me how you can save 36 herds. I'm telling you that you should be asking how many torn threads your own neck can still hold before it tears you apart with it. Kessin sank onto a discarded crate, the fragment still in his hand, and for a moment, long, quiet, weighed down by everything he had learned and suppressed in 200 days, he said nothing. Outside, the pale witness approached the horizon, that third sun that did nothing but watch, and maybe, Kessin thought, that was its only function, to bear witness to everything the others illuminated too brightly to see clearly. Renata will come, Dumaja said. She's already noticed my reactivation. Every security system in this colony was trained by her to report anomalies, and I am, without question, an anomaly. The question, Kessinvar, isn't whether she comes. The question is what you'll tell her when she's here and whether you're ready to carry the consequences of the truth the way you've carried the consequences of the lie all these years. Internal note. I don't know if I'm hoping or calculating. Maybe that's the same thing. Maybe it always was. Incoming external communication, source, unknown ship, origin. New Kairos, passenger, a woman whose implant speaks to the archive I once was. She's coming too. The net is drawing tight. Kessin stood, the fragment clenched in his fist, and walked to the door of the storage bay, out into the last light of the three suns, ready, for the first time in 200 days, not to count, but to act. Behind him, in the darkness, Duma hummed quietly to himself, a melody no human had ever programmed, and that, nonetheless, note for note, matched the song of the burning sea, as if machine and being, sediment and circuit, had always been singing the same song, only in different frequencies, waiting for a moment like this one to finally be heard in harmony. To be continued. That's the story that started everything. Given how much material we've built since then, the origin myth chapter and all 6 parts of Die Rufung der 13, do you want me to keep going in this same order? Next the mythological chapter 1, Das Lied vor den Welten, then the 6 parts of the Rufung der 13 saga one at a time like we've been doing, or is there a piece you'd rather I prioritize first?
To be continued.